Hi, I'm Whitney Espich, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. My name is Lana Swartz, and I'm here to talk a bit about my new book from Yale University Press, New Money, How Payment Became Social Media. And I wanted to kick this off with just a very short 1.5 minute video that debuted, believe it or not, less than, about a year ago, but it's been a pretty long year.
Remember when these were fast? And these? Technology has improved the world around us. So why is it simple to send one of these anywhere in an instant, but not money? What if we made money truly global, stable, and secure? What if everyone was invited to the global economy with access to the same financial opportunities? Introducing Libra, a new global currency designed for the digital world, backed by the belief that money should be fast for Ove in Lagos, simple for Saul's family business in Manila, and secure for Betsabe when sending money home to Mexico City. It's powered by blockchain, making it safe and accessible, no matter who you are or where you're from. So join us as we move towards a world where money works for everyone. This is Libra, and it's just the beginning.
That, of course, was the launch video from 2019 for Facebook Libra, which had many aspirations to, remake the world, as it says on this slide, reinvent money, transform the global economy so people everywhere can live better lives. And in many ways, although I'm very critical of Facebook and of this vision, the questions this video asks: why doesn't money move at the speed and scale of our communicative world? How can money be dependable and accessible for everyone? These are also some of the central questions of my book. Libra promises a utopian vision of money, of everyday money that works for everybody, that is designed for a digital world. And this vision, though vague, is one very close to the kinds of concerns I am committed to and hope to service with my book. But of course, there are other questions that the Libra launch video obscures, which are also central to my book and also central to my work. Namely, what happens when a seemingly unstoppable Silicon Valley behemoth turns its attention to payment? And as we may know, or as you may have heard, Facebook Libra wound up being sort of a failure to launch. The rollout was perhaps a bit of an overreach, and there was a lot of infighting, and it seems like the project largely collapsed. But it was replaced somewhat quietly with Facebook Pay, which is a payment system that, a Facebook payment system that seems to have all the same concerns, concerns about privacy, concerns about governability, concerns about accountability that we might have had for Libra, but none of the utopian aspirations. So with my book, I hope to continue to, think about these questions. Think about how we might have money that keeps a pace of our communicative world, that might be accessible for everyone, while at the same time paying close attention to the industries and actors who seek to kind of provide us with these infrastructures. So really, New Money is a book about the cultural politics of transactional technologies. I think of it as offering a new way to think about money, namely as a communication technology dependent on particular infrastructures. It is in many ways a book about the invisible, about hidden payments, hidden infrastructures, and hidden people who are not able to access particular payment systems. It gives historical context to the disruption envisioned by entrepreneurs and demystifies the promises and perils of technological change. Each chapter of the book takes up an essential mechanism of payment and explains how it works, how it got to be that way, how it's changing, and what those implications are and for whom. So you may have noticed that the subtitle of this book is How Payment Became Social Media. And I think about that term, social media, in a somewhat specific way. So I argue alongside countless economic anthropologists, economic historians, economic sociologists, that money is inherently social. So, we often tend to think about the economy and the economic as being somewhat divorced from the interpersonal, the cultural, the social, but money is fundamentally a social tool. Oops, let me go back. So I think, and this is expressed in many ways. So, I always love to tell my students about how the Euro notes were designed to have imaginary architecture on them, imaginary bridges and arches that don't actually exist in any one European country, but somehow seem to evoke a shared sense of what it means to be European, or sort of an aspirational Europeanness. Because to put any particular specific architecture would kind of unsettle the illusion of the kind of pan-Europeanness that the Euro tries to project, a kind of shared past that can project into a shared future. We often take money and fashion it into origami or fashion into other forms so that it can become a gift. It can move out of the economic and move into the realm of gifts. We use money to express politics, such as this person who, from a Facebook group entitled, "I spend $2 bills to show support for the Second Amendment." So, this person is explicitly using a particular denomination so that someone asks him a question about it, and then he can explain his politics to them. And sometimes the kind of sociality of money is less visible. So, when I got married several years ago, everyone told me whoever pays gets to make the decisions. So I should be very careful about the way I take money in and put money out. We pay therapists because otherwise it would just be a weird one-sided friendship. So in that sense, money creates the therapeutic space. So money is social. It has many social uses, and it's an important social tool. Money, I argue, is also a form of media, and I go into this history somewhat in depth in the book. So the technologies of media and of communication track very closely alongside the technologies of money, whether it's paper currency. Many people don't realize it, but American Express and Wells Fargo started off as postal companies. Some of you may know what this third image is with the keypad and the telephone, but that's actually an early POS, point of sales system, that is attached to a modem, a dial-up modem. So many of us, maybe the first time we ever used something that was like an internet may have been to kind of dial into, to pay for something. So, and there are still like sketchy ATMs at the back of certain sketchy bars where you can still hear the like familiar modem ding dong sounds. And of course today, payment is becoming increasingly assembled, not as part of our consumer financial services portfolio, but as part of our social media portfolio. And so money is social, money is media, and now increasingly it's becoming overtly social media. So every social media company, from Facebook to Snapchat, has tried to produce a payment system, has tried to embed payment in their social media offerings. And almost, banks have tried very hard to try to keep up and try to compete with Silicon Valley as they deliver these newly social payment services. So if money is becoming social, what does that mean for the sociality of money? And already we're beginning to see some excitement, but also some anxiety sort of leak into the popular press and leak into our popular conversations about the way we do money. So here are some examples of headlines about Venmo, which is in some ways the most overtly social media-like of our payment systems. So, Venmo is the next big social network. It's the news feed no one's talking about. It's the best place for voyeurs and gossips to get the real deal about what is actually going on in our social lives. And we are beginning to see that, yes, as money does keep a pace with our communicative world, some of our norms are changing. Yeah, so all of my students admit to engaging in what they call Venmo stalking, which is where they look at the Venmo feeds of their friends and discover secrets, discover new reasons to feel FOMO. But this also allows us to see new meaning in new politics and to really reconsider money as a communication technology, and think about the politics of flow of information, which relates to questions of common carrier, universal service, questions of the public and private, questions of identity and territory. So now I want to just talk a bit about some of the chapters in the book, just very quickly skim over them, and I'll be happy to give a deeper dive. And of course, this book is available from Yale University Press. It's already out as an ebook and as an audiobook, not read by me, thank goodness. And there's a 30% off code if you wish to pre-order the hardcover from the Yale University website. But just to kind of give you a sense of some of the topics. So as I mentioned, I do a deep dive on the history of all of these essential kind of payments mechanisms, and try to really move beyond the hot takes to kind of show how and why they got to be that way. So one of the most important topics I look at is the question of paying. So, we all pay for things, whether it's, fumbling for coins as we get on a bus, not noticing as our Easy Pass is dinged, not having change for a homeless person, paying a homeless person via Venmo. We all pay for things, but increasingly the way we pay is being stratified. So we think about something like Chase Sapphire Reserve, which was the hottest commodity a couple of years ago, the most coveted, desirable payment card that provides tremendous perks, access to the elite lounges in hotels, tons and tons of points per transaction. Ultimately, people who use Chase Sapphire Reserve are making money when they pay for things. But at the same time, those, a lot more Americans than have Chase Sapphire Reserve actually instead use prepaid debit cards. And these prepaid debit cards come with massive fees, up to $20 to activate, $5 per monthly fee, $1 each time you actually swipe, money to even close the account. So they wind up being as expensive as the Chase Sapphire Reserve, but with none of the points. And all of these, these are about cards, but these kinds of inequalities, these kinds of kind of radically different outcomes that happen when we seemingly do the exact same thing, which is swipe a card, are being replicated in the sort of payment app world. And I look into the kind of consequences of this like variegated system of paying. All money is not equal, I guess. I also, and this is a really important point for me, look at the question of getting paid. So this is one area that Silicon Valley person-to-person payment apps have not gotten right in sort of a very serious way. So historically, the electronic payment system was never designed for individuals to receive funds, right? Individuals were always seen as payers, as card holders, not merchants, not a entity with the desire or ability to receive payments. But the kind of online global peer-to-peer economy has sort of changed that. And beginning in the 90s with eBay and PayPal, we saw that technology companies were trying to figure out how people could receive payments. But this is an area where terms of service governed systems, like we see from most new payment systems, are plagued by false positives in violations of a terms of service, and therefore account freezes, and in some cases account closures. Some examples that from my research include a yoga studio instructor who started selling CBD oil, which is totally legal in their state, but was flagged as being against the terms of service by Square, who manages their POS, but also their inventory management system. And suddenly their accounts were frozen without further notice and without any real mechanism for redress in the immediate sense. So she was not able to get paid for any of the merchandise she was trying to sell in the moment that day. One of my students is the head of the UVA Turkish Student Association, and he was collecting, he was using Venmo to collect payment for his club's annual banquet, and he was identified by the kind of machine learning automated fraud detection system for suddenly getting paid too much, and then also too many of those payments being tagged on Venmo with things like Turkish flags or references, in jokes in Turkish. So he was asked to explain himself and explain how he was not engaged in terrorism and or money laundering before he was able to access his payments or access his money. And they actually were not able to hold their banquet on time. So we tend to think about, we all encounter these kind of false positives in, accidentally getting flagged, accidentally falling afoul of terms of service. But when it's money, the stakes are very, very high. I also look at the issue of transactional data and transactional privacy. And, many marketers think of transactional data as the holy grail of social and personal data, because it allows an advertiser or an advertiser to trace a targeted message from to actual real point of purchase in real place and time, to actually close that loop of that advertising loop, which has never been closed before. So it's seen as uniquely valuable. It's also sort of uniquely valuable to humans, to us. I mean, their payments, transactional privacy has long been thought of by, the original cypherpunks like David Chaum and other cryptographers as fundamental to human liberty. I mean, there's a reason why when we talk about identity theft, we're the fundamental feature, our identities, or if our identities are stolen, it's always transactional. It's always about payments. And there are many issues of safety that are uniquely related to transactional data. So if I want to find out where someone physically is, I can look to the potentially leaky data of their payments to see, actually where they are, where they spend their time. This piece, this tongue with lots of emojis on it, is from an art piece by a really interesting kind of technology artist named Hangdu Thikduk, who, and I have the URL here, but she looked at the open API of Venmo to collect payment and transactional information about thousands of people, and then pinpoint individuals and really try to kind of understand their lives, paint a picture of who they are, and then think about how potentially that information could be used in ways that individual might find undesirable. So this was a person who noted in her Venmo feed that she ate a lot of junk food in the year 2017. So pizza, soft drinks, tacos. She maintained her basically a diary of her lunch. And so the question that the artist poses is that something that a health insurance company might be interested in? Is that something that we might want our health insurance company to be aware of? So I look at various regimes of transactional data, how different existing payment companies steward that data, how they've done so historically, and sort of what the outcomes might be. I also turn my attention to the question of new currencies. So I've written quite a bit in the past about Bitcoin and about other kind of cryptocurrencies, and tried to unearth some of the politics. And I do consider that in this book, but I also turn my attention to the question of corporate alternative currencies. So everyone sort of had a laugh a couple of years ago when former Starbucks president, or president of the board, former CEO, and very short time presidential candidate, Howard Schultz of Starbucks, said that he predicted that in the future, we would not see cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, these kind of anarcho-capitalist, born digital, internet-based cryptocurrencies. Instead, he suggested we would see trusted brands offering digital currencies, potentially on a blockchain, that would compete and live alongside our sort of national currencies. And everyone sort of laughed at that, but I want to point out that Starbucks has the most successful and widely used mobile payment app in the United States. It has more reach geographically than the post office, which we think about postal banking, more reach geographically than many major banks. And it already has something that kind of functions like a currency, which are these Starbucks rewards and Starbucks stars, which are quite valuable to some people, as are other corporate kind of pseudo currencies like frequent flyer miles and other kinds of rewards points. So just as we at one point in the 80s and 90s imagined a future internet that was untethered from existing governance and existing government systems, and we imagined that there would be sort of this, we'd be homesteading on the electronic frontier, and that we would be living in a kind of new crypto anarchist world. But instead, we got kind of Facebook, we got platforms, we got kind of the corporate version of all of that. I ask, what might the corporate version of Bitcoin, of cryptocurrency look like, and what kinds of consequences might that have? And so I just want to wrap up this kind of introductory talk to kind of pose a question, or to, I think, that the MIT community. So many folks, I think this is really important for the MIT community, MIT alumni to really consider, because we are the people who are building the future. Whether we are engineers, whether we're mentoring young engineers, whether we're investing, we're the ones having conversations about the future, and indeed the future of money. So if we imagine, and we can see now that money is a technology that can be designed, and it can be designed to have particular affordances, and it can be implemented in particular ways. And those affordances and implications have consequences for everyday people. So I think that we need to really put foremost in our minds, as we kind of think about designing this future, what kind of money would we like to pay with? How would we like to pay? And not simply sort of let it unfold without any deep consideration. And then just as a quick shout out, as Ehsan mentioned, I do have a prior book called Paid, which is available from MIT Press. I co-edited this with Bill Maurer, UC Irvine, and it is a collection of very short essays by scholars across fields and journalists and other money entrepreneurs about the kind of money, about money stuff that interests them. So it has short essays on everything from the Incan quipu, which was a accounting system used in the Incan Empire, to Dogecoin, which is kind of a humorous and sort of forgotten cryptocurrency, the square dongle, the Diners Club card, and kind of everything in between. Thank you so much, and I look forward to going to Q&A.
Ms. Swartz, thank you so much. Okay, I'm just checking you can hear me.
Yeah, I'm taking you off screen share right now.
All right, well,
there we are.
That's a real tour de force.
Okay.
And goodness, so many things come to mind. There are some questions that are building in the Q&A section of the platform. I'm just going to start with a question from Boris Zaretsky, and I guess I had the same thought, which is, like, what's wrong with using cash, credit, and check? Well, why do we need this new world?
Well, let me say I am a huge fan of cash. It's been pretty frustrating for me to hear people wanting to stop using cash during the pandemic, as though cash was going to be like a major vector of the coronavirus, which I don't think it was ever going to be. But again and again we kind of hear that cash is bad, and we hear that cash is going away. And one of the things according to all of the studies I've read, cash actually isn't going away anytime soon. What's actually happening is that cash use is becoming stratified by class and by income. So, you know, some people will be living in the cash economy, and some people will be using Chase Sapphire Reserve and other forms of payment that, you know, benefit them. And so as cash becomes, you know, less and less used, there are already systems where, you know, there are retailers and merchants are already building systems where, you know, cash is kind of, you know, disadvantaged. So I think cash is a great technology, and I think that that it's important that we don't like fully act like cash is going away. The main problem with cash, though, is that you can't use it electronically. You know, it doesn't, as the Facebook video points out, keep a pace with the global digital world. If I can, as you know, as the Facebook video showed us, if I can send a text message to someone in the bathtub, why can't I also send them money? And so I think the real challenge for designers of these new systems is to try to figure out how to preserve the things cash does well. It's free, it's anonymous, it doesn't require a electrical grid or a you know, cell phone connection to use. It doesn't have barriers to entry, while at the same time thinking about how to allow cash or create systems that can be interoperable with the way we live our lives, which is through the internet.
I'm just, so Boris has just come back, and I'm just going to read out his sort of follow-up question, just briefly, which is, he says that we can use credit cards globally and they're very, very convenient, which I suspect is the reason why they've become so ubiquitous. Do any of the new systems, will they have that simplicity?
I think that almost all of the new systems have simplicity at the operator level. So whether it's the merchant or the cardholder level, everything appears seamless and appears simple when we swipe or when we tap or when we, you know, hit a button. But that seamlessness is obscuring layers and layers and layers of many different infrastructures and actors who are making that payment happen. And that's something I really go into in the book. You know, for example, you know, there are, let's say, you know, some people gravitate towards Bitcoin because they think of it as anonymous, they think of it as free from middlemen. But to actually use Bitcoin, to actually pay with Bitcoin or receive Bitcoins, for most people, that isn't actually happening directly on the blockchain. Rather, that's happening through intermediaries who are beholden to all of the same rules, all the same regulations, all the same profit margins as any other intermediary. So effectively, you're using Bitcoin, but you're having to ride the rails of the same old systems. And that might not be apparent to you, but it's happening and like under the hood.
In a way, I suppose it just brings me to another really quite basic question, which perhaps sort of people of my sort of sad vintage don't necessarily know about, which is what is the difference between Bitcoin and blockchain?
Yeah. So
and how are they different to like Apple Pay and some of the other more commonly used forms that are coming up?
Yeah. So Bitcoin is, and I have a paper about this that I'd be happy to send a link to, but a couple papers, but one that I think kind of explains things as my point of view. So Bitcoin, depending on your perspective, is either a form of digital gold or a form of digital cash, right? So it's either this commodity currency that is fully digital, but doesn't require any government or any other kinds of authority to undermine, to underwrite its value. Its value is self-sovereign, self-evident. Its value is whatever the market bears its value for. So in that sense, it's digital gold. But it's also seen as a form of digital cash. So a way of trying to replicate all the good things cash does being anonymous, being self-clearing, not having any middlemen, not being dependent on infrastructures, to kind of create a similar dynamic online, to kind of create a digital system that functions like cash. And Bitcoin is sort of both, like it's gold and it's cash. And depending on, and so I would say, unfortunately, the ecosystem around Bitcoin has been optimized for it to function more like gold, for it to function more like a speculative commodity, rather than for it to function as a really functional, well-working payment system that meets all of the goals of electronic cash or digital cash. So, you know, all of the hype around Bitcoin is for how much it's worth, how much it's trading for. You know, you can buy low and sell high. It's a lot less interesting and a lot more boring. And I hope my book kind of unsettles that, to say, you know, no, it's actually just a form of money that works for people, and allows them to have a modicum of privacy. So because the hype has been mostly around speculation, we haven't seen as much really solid infrastructure developed for using Bitcoin in everyday life. And I also think that because Bitcoin, there's been such an emphasis on Bitcoin as a commodity, it makes it sort of hard to use. Like, why would you buy something? Why would you use something that might be worth twice as much? I mean, not quite, but might be worth a lot more tomorrow to buy coffee. Why would you want to, you know, calculate capital gains taxes on your coffee, when it would be much better to kind of use it for, you know, just to speculate on. So then, you know, this dream of digital cash or digital gold has been around since the 90s. And then, you know, as long as we've kind of had the social internet, we've thought about ways to have commerce on that internet, and then thought about the kind of politics of that commerce and politics of that money. And then blockchain is the distributed ledger system that undergirds Bitcoin. And this is probably too complicated for the time we have now, but basically there is no such thing as a Bitcoin. There aren't like little bits of gold or little coins. Instead, they're just records in this distributed digital ledger. And if I give you a blockchain, or give you a Bitcoin, I'm essentially broadcasting to the blockchain network that I have given it to you, and that kind of is appended to the ledger, appended to the record. And so that blockchain technology has been applied to many, 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 many other things, well beyond just simply creating and sending and keeping track of digital gold or digital cash. And there's been a lot of hype around blockchain, and I think that blockchain has potentially been over applied, like we imagined a couple of years ago that it was going to be the answer to everything. And so the questions I always ask when people ask me about blockchain is, okay, which blockchain, where? So who is hosting the blockchain? Who has access to it? Where is it? Is it, and then if it isn't actually decentralized, why is it an innovation or an improvement on existing kinds of shared record keeping systems? And then the other question I ask is always, you know, the thing about blockchain is that because of its roots in cryptocurrency, it was designed to be computationally intensive and designed in order to be very secure against attacks. And so the question is, do you need that kind of computational intensivity for the task at hand? And I have found that in most cases, the answer to that question is usually no. But I do think that blockchain has kind of invigorated our interest in these invisible systems and their politics. And I think that's a net positive. So
talking of, just on the subject of politics, so quite a few of the questions relate to, I guess, the sort of regulatory space. And I'll try and sort of, I suppose, synthesize it in the following way, which is, so we understand currency as, or modern currency, something that's backed by a state. Mm-hmm. You know, whether it's the dollar bill or the yen or, you know, whichever currency. And a lot of the newer innovations don't necessarily have that. And I suspect that might have been one of the reasons why Libra in its first incarnation sort of fell apart. Do you still think, and of course, and we're heading in, I feel like we're heading into a world where the regulatory state is weakening, and we're seeing this in the way the coronavirus pandemic is not being managed. And there's almost a sort of certain hubris about the fact that, you know, the traditional regulatory state is not what it was. So does that mean that, in a way, the future inevitably will be more commercially backed payment systems because the states are weak and they don't have an appetite to regulate?
Yeah, I mean, that is sort of yes. So, I mean, so many of these new projects are as much about politics and kind of big dreams for an alternative future, that as much as they are about big data or about, you know, actually providing a service. And that's definitely true for Bitcoin. So, you know, Bitcoin absolutely has this aspiration of replacing the regulatory state with an unregulated market-based currency. And my biggest concern here is that while we are thinking so much about a kind of an anarcho-capitalist future and imagining that we imagine the internet will bring about, and that you know, sort of internet aficionados have imagined that the internet will bring about for decades, are we ignoring the kind of corporatization of those you know, post-national systems? So and by arguing that,
if I maybe, you know, another way to put the question, I suppose, is that, you know, if the early part of your book is about history, you know, have we, you know, has there been a period in history where currency has not been backed by a state? I mean, are we in a sense reverting to something that might have been before?
Well, I'll say historically, money has been more often than not plural. So in the and this isn't necessarily like the ultimate money of account, but the money in everyday practice. For most of history, most poor people, or, you know, ordinary people, used various forms of money. Perhaps, you know, say in the U.S. up until the Civil War, while there was kind of there were, you know, nationally issued currency notes, for the most part, there wasn't a really good nationalized uniform system of money. There were varieties of monies issued by states, monies issued by banks, which were local and regional for the most part. There were monies like essentially scrip issued by employers that were by far the dominant money form in most places. And also, most people just like didn't actually use money all that much. Instead, they relied on you know, systems of keeping accounts. So like, you know, we would sort of settle up. You would settle up with the local storekeeper, you know, at an appointed time, or, you know, we didn't actually ever really barter. Instead, direct barter on any scale. Instead, I would sort of say, well, you know, you're going to give me a cow and I'll give you grain every week until we feel that we've settled up on the cow. So one of the things that, you know, a universal national money system does is that kind of erodes away all of that money plurality, all of those kind of all those ad hoc practices that people engaged with. There's a fascinating article or a chapter in a book by David Hinken that talks about how just before the American Civil War, people coming to the city to New York basically had to enter a world of like what it meant to be street smart in the kind of pre-bellum New York, was to be able to use many, many, many different kinds of money forms and to instantly tell, this is bankrupt, this bank is what it is. It isn't, you know, this isn't counterfeit, this is just a bankrupt bank. This is counterfeit, this is good, this is something someone's going to accept tomorrow. This is good, but it's not something someone's going to accept. And that many people had a real facility with being able to navigate a very complicated and socially embedded everyday payment system. And so I think that we are moving to a future that looks like monetary plurality, right, that looks like will have these like need to negotiate many, many different money forms. And this is absolutely true in many parts of the world today. I mean, there are many countries in which multiple currencies circulate, privately issued coupons circulate, and people are still kind of engaging in sort of ad hoc record keeping, ad hoc IOUs. And so I do think that we will be moving towards a future that looks more like that particular past. I mentioned Braudel, but well, and then I should also say that, that in the past, monetary plurality was stratified. So, poor people and use these kind of varieties of money forms, low denomination tokens, petty coin, employer issued script. Wealthy people, for the most part, used banknotes, bank drafts, systems of accounts with the kinds of retailers they dealt with. And there was very little, and like there's a historian who I refer to in the book, there's very little conversion between rich people's money and poor people's money. So it was stratified, plural, stratified, complicated, messy, and like kind of one of the cool things of modernity is the ability to have a uniform state issued currency. And I think that that's just as the way that kind of the modern state is sort of withering, we may see, I think that's kind of one of the affordances of modernity we're sort of losing.
I'm going to try and squeeze in a couple more questions before we go. So Neil Steinmetz has asked a few. I'm going to pick one of them, which is, and again, it's sort of, I suppose, just relates to your last one. How linked are the newer systems, and do they need to be? Does dollar need to talk to Bitcoin, need to talk to PayPal, need to talk to Apple? And I suppose, what role for central banks, if you agree that they need to be linked, or do they not need to be linked?
I think that if they are not linked, then we will see segmentation, siloing, we'll see situations in which the wealthy and the privileged have the best kind of money and those who aren't don't. And it's not even simply that they don't have enough money, it's that they don't have the right kind. And I think that that will be a real problem going forward. And we are seeing a lot of, I guess you could call arbitrage at the moment of linkage. So there is a whole ecosystem of new intermediaries who are attempting to kind of create those linkages at a cost. And I haven't seen tremendous interest from most central banks in regulating this. I mean, I think there's this idea that it's too early, too new, we're not certain it's going to happen. It sounds kind of silly when you talk about regulating frequent flyer miles or Starbucks points, and maybe marginally less silly now when you talk about regulating Bitcoin. But I think that, and I think there is.
Isn't that a bit scary? Don't you think central banks should be thinking about this?
I do. I don't know if it's politically tenable. And I think that that's part of why I bring up the kind of romance of libertarianism that has been built into the internet all along, and why we need to kind of be real about the fact that what what we are embracing is not a kind of libertarian anarchist vision, but rather the corporate vision that always sneaks in when we are trying to be kind of romantic about the self-regulating market.
And I'm just going to go for one more question, which is from Joseph. And Joseph asks, of the different money technologies, do you have a favorite?
Do I have a favorite money technology?
Yes. Would you like to advertise one?
Cash, I suppose. I mean, cash allows you to do many, many things. It just doesn't allow you to interoperate on the internet. I guess another favorite money technology of my own is a gift that my now husband gave me many years ago for Valentine's Day, which was a physical Bitcoin that was built into a necklace that was actually fake. So it was like a counterfeit physical Bitcoin, which there are kind of many layers that make that kind of an amusing payment technology to me.
Brilliant. Well, that's a nice sort of mix of the old and the new. Professor Lana Swartz, it's been an absolutely fascinating discussion. I've certainly learned a lot. I look forward to getting hold of a copy of your book at 30% discount, I understand, from the Yale University Press website.
Code Y money.
Code
Y, the letter Y.
The letter
and then
Y.
The word money.
And money. And is that case sensitive or just?
I don't know.
Don't know. All right. Well, we'll experiment.
But try them both ways. And
This
if it doesn't
is
work, email me.
This is MIT alum, so all good at experimentation. So it just leaves me to, first of all, thank you again hugely for coming online and taking viewers' questions. On behalf of the Alumni Association of MIT, thank you for tuning in. Thanks again to Professor Swartz for joining us today. All questions will be forwarded to our speaker, I'm told, and to the Alumni Office staff. So do keep the chat window open if you'd like to carry on networking and chatting, and it'll stay open for another 15 minutes. A reminder, this broadcast will be available on the MIT Alumni YouTube channel within a week of today. And thank you for watching, and it's been a huge pleasure for me to be linked back into the MIT world. Thank you, and good evening from London.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.